to diseases that are prevalent on your farm, that's really a number one consideration in disease management. With canola diseases, remember that we want to integrate as many tools as we can, including resistant varieties, crop rotations, fungicides of course are available, irrigation management, to integrate as many of these tools as we can to achieve our goals of minimizing disease. Now in southern Alberta, the major diseases on canola, and I'll sort of start from the seedling stage onward, would be Ctk and Seedling Blight. These are caused by organisms such as Rhizoctonia, Fusarium, Pythium, and other species that reside in the soil. And it's usually in seasons like we had this year when we have cool, wet conditions that will favor those diseases, and they result in reduced stems. So you don't have the yield potential, of course, if you get a lot of stand reduction because of seed decay and damping off. And there we like to use seed treatments to help discourage that, but the seed treatments are only effective for probably a couple of weeks. Once the seedling roots grow away from that zone of protection, they're fair game for whatever organisms are in the soil. Beyond that, we start to get into looking at seedling diseases like blackleg, a fungus disease that's seed and residue borne, and we're actually seeing an upsurge in blackleg again here in Western Canada as new races of the pathogen evolve that will attack the varieties that are resistant. So again, very important consideration. Check the seed guide for blackleg resistant varieties. The breeders are constantly looking for new genetics to bring in. Blackleg can also be sprayed for, often as early as the cotyledon or first few true leaves coming on the plant. That's when the disease can really take hold. It forms a spore stage that's splash dispersed, and you need to provide protective fungicides, and those can be used right up to almost this stage if you have the disease pressure. But realistically, most of the disease pressure seems to occur early in the season. Now, this time of the year is when the stem canker phase of the disease will develop, and that's a girdling canker right at the base of the stem that will cause the plant to fall over often in winds. And that's perhaps the most destructive stage. And Dr. Ralph Lang with Alberta Innovates Technology Futures has been surveying for blackleg across Alberta for the past few years in response to China's closure to Canadian exports of canola seed because of their concern over the virulent form of blackleg in our seed. And Ralph's survey work, which has included fields here in southern Alberta, has shown that blackleg occurs in almost every canola field. You can always find low levels of either the virulent or the avirulent, weakly pathogenic form of the disease. At this stage, as well, as the canopies close in, we probably will not see it here because we have lots of air movement in the canopy. Is a disease called white stem rot or sclerotinia stem rot, caused by the fungus Sclerotinia sclerotiorum. It has a very wide host range, including most broadleaf crops, and if you grow dry beans, sunflowers, canola, you'll be very familiar with this disease. And it it overwinters as a small sclerotial body in the soil, and once the canopy begins to close over, often at the early flowering stage, those little black bodies germinate to form a small mushroom, which forcibly discharges spores called ascospores. The ascospores themselves are very small, and they don't have a lot of energy as a spore, and they can't germinate and infect the stems directly. But what they like to do is they will grow very readily on the petals, the dead petals that fall off, and especially those that lodge in the branches here are a great food source for these ascospores. These ascospores are discharged, as I mentioned, and most actually never make it out of the field, but a few do, and they can move from one field to another. So if you had a cereal field over there that had bad sclerotinia last year in the canola crop, those ascospores could move by wind into this crop here. And what you'll see is the fungus colonizes the blossoms and it grows into the stems and causes a stem rot. Very serious, especially if they're down lower in the canopy. So when we have wide growth spacings like this, with good air movement through the canopy, that discourages Sclerotinia. It likes the heavy, dense canopies. And so to protect against that disease, you have a number of options. There's a new fungicide called Contans, which is actually soil applied and incorporated the year prior to putting canola in, and it attacks and degrades the sclerotia. And Farming Smarter has had a large field trial looking at Contans and another biological fungicide called Serenade, which is a bacterium, but it's used as a foliar spray. Those foliar sprays are usually put on 20 to 30% bloom, up to 50% bloom. And the idea is to provide a protective covering on these blossoms so they don't get infected with the Sclerotinia, as well as parts of the upper canopy. So in real heavy canopies, you can see infection down further down in the canopy, so penetration of the sprays is important. The last disease I'll mention is Clubroot, which, as you have heard, probably is very well established now in central Alberta. 20 counties in Alberta have Clubroot. We have the only infestations in canola in the south here have been in Newell County. We have 3 fields there with Clubroot. Otherwise, you have to go up into the Red Deer area before you find the disease. It attacks and forms galls on the roots, and that debilitates the plant. The pathogen basically commandeers the metabolism of the plant to reproduce itself, and it forms a big club-shaped gall on the canola roots. Very long-lived in the soil. We have about 6 or 8 resistant varieties that appear to be working well, but it's still the kind of disease that you don't want to end up with on your farm. So if you're trying to use machinery or have custom operators coming out of central Alberta, make sure that the equipment is cleaned and sanitized before it comes onto your farm. There are no chemical controls for clubroot in canola. It's managed by crop rotations, by resistant varieties, and sanitation of equipment. Okay, that's a quick overview of some of the canola diseases. If you're interested in seed treatments and registered fungicides for foliar application, the Crop Protection Guide 2012 is a great source of information, and it lists all of the products that can be used on canola, including the new biological products like Serenade and Contans. Any questions before we move on to cereals?
Have you seen blackleg and the blackleg resistant canola?
Well, the older resistant varieties, yes. The newer varieties seem to be holding up fairly well. Ralph Lang collects samples of blackleg and tests the strains. We used to have a fairly simplistic view of the strains in blackleg, and we thought there were between 4 and 6 strains of that organism here in Western Canada. But through recent research, we've discovered that there's probably more like 12 to 15 different strains of the organism, and they occur in different localities. So one thing Ralph is trying to do is to determine which strain exists in the different canola production areas in Western Canada, so that we can advise growers, if you grow in, say, north central Saskatchewan, you have strains A, B, and C, you should be looking at these varieties. So we're trying to generate some of that information in Alberta as well. But it's always a risk. The blackleg pathogen has a sexual stage, it recombines, and there's always going to be new strains evolving.
There's a possibility you can get bug-resistant canola?
Bug-resistant canola.
Some mustard.
Yeah, I think there's probably different degrees of tolerance in canola. We see that with flea beetles. But insect resistance, unless they could genetically insert something like the BT, Bacillus thuringiensis gene, into canola, as they've done with corn, for example, that's still an elusive goal. We're making better progress, I think, with disease resistance, certainly in canola, but Insect resistance, I know they've looked at canola varieties, for example, without petals that are less attractive to insects and to Sclerotinia. But I'm not aware of any major breakthroughs that have been made in resistance to insects.
So like the biological, the serenades, that can be the thing of the future, or because they're going to have fungicides around?
Yeah, well, serenade, you know, in trials with it here in southern Alberta, I'll be honest with you, it has been a bit hit and miss. The biological products rely on them multiplying on the plant's surface to create a surface population that will interfere with the spores of a pathogen should they land there. So there's a competition effect going on. Serenade has to be put on much earlier than the conventional fungicides in order for that phyloplane or surface population of bacteria to develop. And we don't understand very well all the factors that affect the colonization by those bacteria, how irrigation, for example, affects it, how the herbicides we use, the fungicides we use affect it. We know that it has efficacy against Sclerotinia, but there have been a lot of poor results with it, and of course conventional fungicides, that happens as well. So I think it's going to be a learning curve to learn to use that product effectively, and it does have to be applied multiple times as well to be effective. Any other questions? Yeah, and if you have any, we're going to be focusing today mostly on cereals and pulses, but if you have any questions on any other crop diseases as time allows, we'd be glad to take those from you. So I think we're going to go next door to the cereal plot.